There's no denying that motorcycles are getting bigger. We have 1100cc Panigales, we have 2000cc bikes from Harley-Davidson, and in some extreme cases, we have 2500cc muscle cruisers from Triumph. What the hell is going on? This was unthinkable 30 to 40 years ago. Why the hell are motorcycles getting so darn big? And this increase isn't just in the large displacement category, the flagship bikes. We're seeing this across the boards. Beginner bikes are getting bigger, middleweight bikes are getting bigger. Everything's displacement is increasing and creeping upwards. As an example, let's look at Kawasaki's entry-level model. In the late 80s, Kawasaki sold their entry-level Ninja 250. And at the same time, they sold the Ninja 500R back in the day that was their middleweight beginner sport bike. This evolved into the Ninja 650 in 2005 and has stuck around since then. Kinda long in the tooth if you ask me. In 2012, the Ninja 250 evolved into the Ninja 300, and then in 2018, the Ninja 300 evolved into the Ninja 400, kind of like a Pokemon getting bigger over time. And as many of you know, in 2024, that evolved into the Ninja 500, so it kind of came back full circle to what the Ninja 500R used to be. And kind of ironically, it's really funny to see that Kawasaki has a Ninja 500 on the showroom floor right next to a Ninja 650. You're kind of like, what? They're way too close in displacement. The Duke range underwent a similar transformation. The first KTM Super Duke debuted in 2005 and featured a 999cc V-twin. Whereas today, the Super Duke is a whopping 1390 cc's, making like 190 horsepower or something like that. This beast is also sold alongside the Duke 990, which is the new middleweight option, which, yes, again, if you're keeping up, is the same displacement as the old large displacement bike that used to exist. So manufacturers are evolving these bigger bikes, and then they have room for the smaller bikes to grow more into the middleweight category. So it's a good segue to talk about these middleweight bikes, which can help us understand why motorcycles are increasing in size. As we've discussed on this channel many times, the middleweight segment of motorcycling is this kind of nebulous 650 to 900cc range. And in the middleweight category, one case study that's kind of interesting is the Triumph Street Triple 765 RS, where you're seeing the MT-09 have 890ccs, the Duke 990 have 990ccs. Triumph's gone for something a little bit more spicy that makes a little bit more peak horsepower. If you guys didn't know, I've got this bike in my stable right now. I've been enjoying it, riding around, I track tested it, and it's actually a giveaway bike on yamynoob.co. So go to yamynoob.co and the link down in the description. We're doing the giveaway on this bike right now. I've given away over 55 motorcycles at this point. It's been a whole bunch of them, and you can get signed up on the website and get entered to win. We're doing a ton of great giveaway bikes this year. We're doing one every single month, by the way. So if you sign up as a member right now, you're gonna lock in your entries, be able to apply those for all the future giveaways we got coming up. We got a bunch of new awesome models. The next bike we're giving away after the Street Triple is a brand new model, so you guys are not gonna wanna miss that. Stay tuned and check it out. Middleweight sport bikes for a long time were 600s. We're talking 4-cylinder, 599cc Japanese sport bikes that were all a dime a dozen, and everybody had them. But the popularity of these bikes waned over time, and manufacturers had to contend with consumers not really wanting these bikes anymore, and these bikes were struggling to meet emission standards. On top of that too, manufacturers were trying to come up with creative ways to cut costs, and so the parallel twin started becoming ubiquitous. The thing about parallel twins though is that in order for them to make similar power to a 599cc inline 4, they gotta be pretty big in displacement, and they gotta be pretty hopped up. You can even see this in Aprilia's RS660, which is kind of a gold standard middleweight sport bike for today's world of 2025. It makes about 100 horsepower out of a 660cc parallel twin, which, yes, admittedly is a far cry from the 128 we used to get on the R6 or the ZX6 of days past. But the big thing about it too is that the characteristics of the power of these engines is very different than a 4-cylinder. You get immediate low-down accessible torque, which makes them great for everyday usable riding. You can cross-platform these engines into plenty other motorcycles, adventure bikes, sport bikes, naked bikes. And by giving riders immediate accessible torque, it makes the motorcycle feel more fun and playful, where they're usually spending their time in the rev range, which is kind of the middle to the high end of the bike. Nobody wants to admit it, but you don't really spend that much time at 16,000 RPMs on an R6 unless you're at a racetrack. But really, the absolute main reason that motorcycles keep getting larger is simply due to emissions. This one's a little complicated to wrap your head around, but it's actually pretty cut and dry. If you want to make a motorcycle that makes about the same amount of power while producing fewer hydrocarbons out of the exhaust pipe, you have to make a motorcycle that is a little bit larger in displacement and ideally with fewer cylinders. This largely has to do with the surface area that is spread across 4 cylinders versus the surface area that's spread across just 2 cylinders in the case of emissions. It's why something like a 599cc inline 4 in theory produces more emissions than something like a 790 parallel twin. The surface area across all those cylinders is greater than in just the parallel twin. You also combine that with the fact that these new parallel twin engines are simply less strung out. They don't rev as high, they don't produce as much gas out the back. And here's a quick example using Honda's Africa Twin. The Africa Twin went from 998 cc's to 1084 cc's to gain just 6 horsepower. And really, 6 horsepower on a bike that weighs over 500 pounds isn't really doing much. This increase in displacement's much more likely to appease tightening emissions regulations. The Yamaha MT-09 platform is well documented for this as well, going from an 847cc to an 890cc, and yet netting just 2 horsepower increase. These increases in displacements, changes in the bread box or the catalytic converter down below on the engine, integrated exhaust systems, all these things are designed to reduce emissions. And that's a good thing. We want to breathe clean air. The other knock-on effect of this as well is that you typically see issues in second gear and in the mid-range of these bikes where they just seem a little lackluster, and the new ECU tuning that you can do on these machines really wakes them up because they're so neutered from the factory to comply with these emissions regulations and noise regulations as well. It's also why Yamaha's MT-09 platform specifically has acoustically enhanced intake valves that allow the rider to really hear the engine pulling air in, because you don't really hear that much out the back anymore. And the next reason why motorcycles keep getting bigger is pretty darn simple if you live in America. The concept that bigger is better is seen across our entire society. Every year you're being sold a smartphone that's slightly larger. Every year there's a TV that's a little bit bigger. Every year there's a pickup truck that's a little bit bigger. Everything keeps getting bigger because the only way you can keep competing in markets like that is by producing things that are bigger. By simply making the number larger on the side of the motorcycle, see BMW's R1300 or the KTM 1390 Super Duke, it spurs on interest for consumers. They start to think, oh, maybe I should upgrade. That's a bigger bike. The number is bigger. You even see this in the economy where you just want to see number go up and to the right. Everything has to go up. Number must get bigger. And even the most sensible riders can fall prey to this mentality, especially now in the beginner class. When you look at stuff like the R3, it can't really compete with the CF Moto 450 SS or the new Ninja 500 or the Aprilia RS 457. In reality, it's perfectly fine for anybody to pick that bike up and start on it, but you're going to be seen as making a suboptimal choice because you could have got something that was a little bit bigger. And we're guilty of it too in the content and journalism and media industry, where we look at stuff like the R3 and we say, oh, it's getting long in the tooth. It can't compete. It's got to get bigger to keep up with everything else. You look at stuff like the Ninja 650 as well. It's so long in the tooth. It's so anemic. It can't possibly be as good as the CP2s or the 790s or whatever you want to compare them to. And paradoxically, people also have insane nostalgia about older bikes to where any new bike that comes out is always compared to the 600s of yesteryear. And we always say, they're not as good as they used to be. They couldn't be as good as they used to be. And it's like we keep making advancements and progress, but it kind of feels like we're chasing our own tail in a way. And the other very important element about this too is that if manufacturers can increase the displacement, they can have a good reason to justify charging higher prices. You're getting more bike for the money. You're getting a bigger engine. This bike should cost more. Because honestly, let's face it, bold new graphics is kind of a losing marketing strategy, even if you're Suzuki. But sometimes it can come full circle, like the GSX-R 750, which I guarantee you is going to get an update and run functionally the same, and Suzuki's just going to capitalize on this new super sport market. It has to happen. And honestly, bikes are getting bigger because the customer is always right. People want bigger machines. They like more power. They like the feeling of having more power. It's why super bikes keep getting a little bit more horsepower year after year, because people love telling people the big number that they have on the side of the tank or on the spec sheet. Harley riders gush over their 131 big bore kits. Street squids who are 20 years old go out and buy leader bikes because 600s just couldn't possibly be fast enough. I mean, this is a phenomenon in motorcycling. We can't get away from it. For a lot of riders, climbing the ladder power, displacement. It's the be-all, end-all. It's what this whole thing is about. So if manufacturers keep making their bikes bigger, better, and faster, riders will always have something to lust over, increasing their consumption and always having something to reach for in the future. I mean, you saw this in the comment section of the new Panigale V2, where so many people were outraged that they had the audacity to make something that was smaller in displacement, made a little less power, made way more sense for the market that it's currently in. People were incensed about this. I was personally upset because it didn't have Desmos anymore, but that's just me. It's difficult to wrap your head around the fact that the new version of a popular model might be smaller, it might have less power, it might not be always bigger is better. So motorcycles are getting bigger. Is that a bad thing? Well, it depends on how you look at it. In a certain context, it's great that we have larger displacement, two-cylinder motorcycles that provide more power, more torque, they're cheaper to make and more people can afford them, and they're cross-platformed, meaning shared parts and all that good stuff too. And a motorcycle getting bigger in displacement in terms of emissions regulation is great too, because the alternative is that they're taken out to pasture and not built anymore. I'd rather have a bike be a little bit bigger in displacement, maybe making a little less peak horsepower, but it's still being produced. Perhaps in a nostalgic sense, I do pine over the four-cylinder bikes of yesteryear or the big twins that used to exist, the analog nature of them, but motorcycling moves on, and some of that stuff we're talking about was 25 to 30 years ago. We gotta move on at some point. But I think when a motorcycle continuously gets bigger just to pique consumer interest without really improving the bike or making it lighter weight or making it easier to ride, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. The vast majority of big, bad, powerful motorcycles are insane overkill for most riders. You got street squids thinking that they're gonna go get 200 horsepower and they can't even really make use of 40. So manufacturers keep perpetuating the idea that your bike is not enough. You need the bigger, you need the better, you gotta get that new model. Because guess what? They want you to keep buying motorcycles. So it's a bit of an Ouroboros, right? You make bigger bikes to meet emissions and new riders keep buying them so they can keep getting the new ones because they need to feel like they're moving on up in the ladder. Bigger numbers make people feel better. It all kind of loops in on itself. And truthfully, as motorcycles get bigger, more complicated, and just more laden with technology and more emissions, regulations, compliance, they just get ultimately more expensive and more complicated. And honestly, I just want to see simpler, fun motorcycles for people. I don't really care what the displacement is. It could be 300, 500, 550 cc's. It doesn't really matter to me. What I just want to see are simple, bare bones, great motorcycles that people can afford to buy. And the best part is, as long as it's got a twist throttle and two wheels, it's probably a lot of fun. But what do you guys think? Have motorcycles gotten too big? Are we reaching a point where we just can't really get any more meaningful gains out of these bikes? Would you like to see a return to the 250 class? Do you think the Ninja 500 is too big? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for checking out today's video. I truly do appreciate it. We'll catch you in the next one. See you later. Well, boys, that's the end of the show for today, but there's always a new video tomorrow. Every single day, there's a YamiNoob video. While you wait for the next one to queue up, become a member on YamiNoob.co and join to win this amazing Triumph Street Triple 765 RS that's right next to me. Cosmic yellow, street performance, track performance, a sonorous 3-cylinder. It has it all. Make sure you join on YamiNoob.co and don't delay.